Are you annoyed by manual maintenance of test equipment?
Babtec Test Equipment Management helps you keep track of everything.
Welcome to the Q.Focus Test Equipment Management. My name is Lars von Strahlen.
Welcome from me too. I am Daniel von Sondern.
Before we get into the actual Babtec software, we would like to show you again today a positioning of which modules we will be looking at in detail today. And in fact, there are only two modules, but they are very closely interconnected in the Babtec world. That's why a small graphic we've brought along will help. The Babtec modules you already know today are structured in a modular way within the Babtec software. Each module can run independently. The modules that are in focus today are the test equipment management and the test equipment capability analysis. Daniel, besides these two modules that we're going to look at in detail today, you've also added this orange shading around them. Why?
Of course, the real benefit comes when you use the modules in an integrated way. You can, of course, manage, monitor, and calibrate your test equipment individually. But if, for example, you also use the Babtec software for incoming goods inspection or production inspection, you use test equipment for that as well. And this is where the integration of test equipment management comes into play, so that I can prove that I used a calibrated test device during my production inspection, or the system tells me, no, you can't use this test device during the production inspection. In addition, I have a documentation obligation. That means I can then prove which test device in which status was used to record which measurement value by which operator.
Okay, so you can get an impression of how the whole thing actually works. In quotation marks, let's switch over to the Babtec software. The first thing you can see here, which you might already be familiar with, is our welcome screen, our dashboard. And the dashboard we've brought with us here is one that's focused on test equipment. You can see that in the lower area, there's even live access to test equipment directly via the list. At the top left, there are shortcuts or little previews of to-dos. And then you can see here, for example, that we have 10 pieces of test equipment currently waiting to be calibrated.
With a double click on the 10, we now get a more detailed list of these 10 pieces of test equipment that are due for calibration soon. And actually, we're already jumping straight into the test equipment management module, into a saved view.
These saved views we're talking about here can be defined completely freely by you. This includes, for example, that you can define filters for which test equipment you want to see. In this example, we've set it up so that all test equipment scheduled for calibration in the next 3 months is displayed. But beyond that, there are also options to filter by test equipment type, by location, by owner. So there are various ways to narrow down this list of test equipment and see exactly what you want to see. And in addition, you can configure the list itself. Maybe you say, okay, this next inspection I have here is really important, so I'll move it right to the top to change the order.
These views can then be saved as personal or global views, giving you the option to create a view just for yourself, your own perspective on your test equipment, to create a view for your team, for example, to announce that certain test equipment is due soon, or to highlight specific types of test equipment.
The information stored in the database can not only be accessed within the Babtec software, but if you wish, can also be communicated via email notification. For example, you can set it up so that you receive an email every Monday morning listing all the test equipment that needs to be calibrated that week. This goes so far that dynamic emails are generated here, meaning that the person to whom the test equipment is currently assigned receives an email, and that this notification process for the people who are supposed to return the test equipment runs fully automatically, so you don't have to do anything at all in this area.
From this view, we now jump into a dedicated piece of test equipment and land here in the master data, where we can maintain general information. Test equipment number, cost center, costs, purchase price, etc. There are many fields here that we deliver as standard. And standard is also the key word. Babtec is a standard software. That means every customer initially receives this layout for test equipment management. Nevertheless, we still want to give you the option to customize the appearance and the way you maintain data in Babtec yourself. Generally, your key user should have the following function, or more precisely, the user right to use this function, which allows them to influence the layout of the software. Lars will demonstrate this now.
For this, I will now take the image card in the Babtec software and position it all the way to the edge next to my actual test equipment information displayed here. You can see that here the image moves to the right side and is permanently visible. Now I still have some space left, so I will take my document card and have it displayed below the image. I close my view, and with that I have defined a global view that provides me with the master data information at the field level, plus image, plus text.
Now this view is visible to every user who logs in. That means there is a global view, as mentioned, for all users. Now the test equipment management has one more small special feature. Additionally, I can also create user fields that depend on the type of test equipment. For example, the test equipment type caliper could have 3 additional fields where you can enter a resolution, a deviation range, or other information. The micrometer screw gauge might have 2 more fields, and another piece of test equipment might not need any additional fields at all. This means I can further influence the layout depending on the type of test equipment.
Where fields can be added, fields can also disappear. Because with this layout designer, you can of course also go in and remove any fields you want from the screen mask. Maybe there are fields here where you say, wow, those are completely irrelevant for us. No problem at all. Just activate the layout designer, drag and drop the fields out of the mask, and really streamline it so that only the information you need for your system is visible. Very important, all of this is based on the standard software. So this layout we've created here is updatable.
Now let's get to the core topic of test equipment management. The maintenance and monitoring of the calibration interval, or the calibration of test equipment. Here, in the lower section, various data are displayed to me. For example, I can now see the next date for the calibration check, and this date can be specified or calculated differently by the system. And the classic case is that I have a fixed time interval. Like here in this section, my caliper must be calibrated every 3 months. That would be one option. Alternatively, I could initiate calibration based on the number of measurements. Maybe I have a device that experiences significant wear with each measurement. And in this case, for example, we would perform a calibration check every 250 measurements.
This check based on individual measurements, of course, only works if Babtec is aware of the individual measurements. And that requires you to use our inspection module, meaning our incoming goods inspection, production inspection, or outgoing goods inspection. Because here, the Babtec software knows exactly which measuring instrument is currently being used. Has a measurement value been recorded? So I increase the counter. But I think that's obvious. With this monitoring based on the time component there, the 3 months there is a special case that I can activate. That is dynamic measurement. And dynamic measurement allows me, depending on where the measuring instrument is located, to shorten or extend these 3 months. So you have locations where the measuring instrument is used very intensively. Then you can assign a usage level that reflects this, and you might not need to calibrate after 3 months, but after 2 months instead. You have a measuring instrument storage area where the instrument is hardly used at all. Then you can have the system automatically extend the inspection interval from 3 months, for example, to 6 months. And these are the automated processes that are meant to benefit you not by sticking rigidly to the 3 months interval, but by making it dynamic depending on how intensively the measuring instrument is used.
In practice, this is relatively simple by simply recording the current location of the measuring instrument. And this recording of locations or the issuing and returning of measuring instruments is handled in Babtec using events. We provide a handful of events as standard. This means that issuing an event, receiving it, or transferring a measuring instrument can all be managed with these events. And the system automatically knows where the measuring instrument is, who currently owns it, and possibly even the level of wear at that location.
Every event you create is stored within the history. You can see here that from the creation of the measuring instrument to the latest event in this case, an internal calibration that was performed of this can be found within these events. This even goes so far that the events can be expanded with any custom events you configure yourself. Perhaps you want to document that you have lent a measuring instrument to a supplier. No problem at all. You simply create a corresponding event, and then, using the filter function, you get a very quick overview. Which measuring instruments are currently not with me, but are with a supplier, for example?
Let's go ahead and perform a calibration. We have several options for calibration. For the first time, let's take a look at the first step now, internal calibration. And for this, we use the event internal inspection, which then generates an internal inspection order. Here I select the type of inspection and then start the internal inspection based on a predefined inspection instruction. We provide standard inspection instructions for common handheld measuring instruments, and here is now an inspection instruction for a caliper.
I work through these preparatory steps. Here, for the first time, I have what's called an attributive characteristic, which allows me to document my inspection as either okay or not okay. And depending on whether it's okay or not okay, the later decision on the use of the measuring instrument will be made. But in our example here, everything is fine. I say okay and click through my inspection instructions step by step until I reach the first entry of measured value. So here is the 0 point that needs to be determined. In my case, it really is 0. Now I'm supposed to carry out my various measurements. I'll just do that manually here for now.
Of course, there's also the option to record the measurement values directly in digital form, depending on the measuring instrument used, for example, a Bluetooth caliper. It could now transfer the measurement values directly into the system by simply pressing a button or using a foot switch with a measuring device that's, for example, connected to a Steinwald box. So, in addition to manual entry, I also have the option to transfer measurement values directly into the system digitally.
The final step in the calibration process is the decision that needs to be made. By clicking OK, I can have the system suggest a decision for me based on the calibration information stored in the background. You can already see that. Here, all calibration characteristics are marked in green. Everything is in order. So here as well, the usability decision is set to usable. This can be overridden. But in our case, everything is perfect. I click OK, and with that, I have established and documented my internal calibration within the database.
All right, internal calibration. We can check that off. Now, of course, it may be that you have more than just a handful of measuring instruments and also calibrate externally. That means you send the measuring instrument or several measuring instruments to a calibration laboratory. And here, we make it easier to exchange this data for the measuring instruments by using the VDI VDE 2623 standard for the exchange of calibration data.
I select the measuring instruments from the list that I want to send to my calibration service provider, and I add the selected instruments to my card by clicking the plus sign. I can view the card and now see a list of the measuring instruments that are to be sent. This sending is now the actual export process that I am carrying out. This export process can be individually configured for the various calibration laboratories you work with. So this is your list of calibration laboratories. I'll now take my calibration laboratory Testo here as an example. Within this configuration of the calibration laboratory, paths are defined where an XML file is exported, as well as additional information such as documenting an order number here. For example, I set the planned return date to the end of the month, and by clicking OK, these test instruments are now exported into an XML file, which you send to your calibration laboratory along with the test instrument.
The calibration laboratory would, of course, calibrate the measuring instruments and send them back to you. Additionally, you will also receive this XML file. All you then need to do is import this XML file, which means checking the items back in. In doing so, all the information associated with the measuring instruments is written back. This means that, on the one hand, each measuring instrument receives an updated inspection date, that is, the next inspection date is set. Each measuring instrument receives an entry in the history, making it traceable when the instrument was at which calibration laboratory. And if you have also received PDF certificates from your calibration laboratory, these will also be stored directly with the measuring instrument.
Daniel, we've now discussed the topic of test equipment management. That means building up the event history of the test equipment. We've looked at internal calibration. We've reviewed master data, images, and documents that I can store. With that, the test equipment management itself is basically complete for now.
Yes, that's correct. Of course, you also need to additionally prove for certain test equipment that they are actually capable of measuring the characteristics you want to capture in real life. This means you have to conduct a test equipment capability study to demonstrate that there is no influence from the operator or the environment that could affect the measurement result. And for that, there's a separate module, the MSA, or the Test Equipment Capability module, which you can use completely independently to carry out the capability analysis.
Let's take a closer look at that now. This now builds on the test equipment management. So I need to have test equipment management in order to perform SA. Yes, but I can also do test equipment management without SA. So this is now the optional part, practically, that we're looking at here. And we find this optional part within the Babtec software in the module Test Equipment Capability Analysis. And in this Test Equipment Capability Analysis module, if we were to carry out a new test equipment capability analysis with you now, for that, we would have to enter a lot of measurement values, Daniel.
Thankfully, we don't actually have to, because we will import the measurement values together now, and for that we'll use the CUDAS format. For example, I have a measuring machine that recorded these measurement values like a Keyence machine. It is definitely capable of exporting in CUDAS format as well. And now we're using a CUDAS file that, in addition to the measurement values, also contains the characteristic information and which can now be read in directly. That means we select it here as the source and choose the measurement method. The characteristic and the tolerances are pre-filled directly because they're already included in the CUDAS file, and you can proceed straight to the next step.
The next step means I document the information, for example, which standard I use to calibrate everything here. We don't have that at this point, so I leave it blank. Just like the number of parts to be measured, the individual ones, the inspectors, and so on, this is already specified for us by the CUDAS file. So I'll also leave that unchanged, meaning that this second step simply involves clicking continue.
But what I can certainly do now is complete the documentation. That means I now enter the relevant inspectors who are involved in this inspection into the system, and in doing so, I access the Babtec users who are currently in the system. I can immediately see by their abbreviations which of the 3 inspectors are involved in carrying out the inspection or have already performed it.
Optionally, I could also document the inspection station and the standard, but in our example, I don't need to do that. So I simply move on and get a brief summary of everything I have entered in this section. And by clicking on Finish, this Gage capability study is now automatically populated from the CUDAS file. You can see that here in the lower section, yes. Here you can see the measured values from Inspector A, the measured values from Inspector B, and the measured values from Inspector C, all displayed here, yes. These are the different sections that are shown to me. Plus, these values are also automatically transferred into the analysis. On the one hand, there's the graphical analysis where the measurement series from each inspector are displayed for me in a kind of control chart. But of course, there's also the numerical analysis, which breaks down for me in great detail which mathematical results were calculated and produced within this evaluation.
Well, I see a lot of red here. Obviously, the measuring device is actually not operational. Now, it may well be that you want to share this information with parties who are not part of your company. That means I might want to provide a report to my customer because they could request such a capability analysis. So I include this in the classic Babtec report. Here too, there is a Babtec report behind it, which I can open directly. The report compiles all the master data, lists the inspectors, the individual measurement values, and then concludes with a graphical overview of the measurement value distribution as well as the result of this capability analysis.
Any report that can be called up in Babtec, regardless of which Babtec module you are using, since we provide them by default, can always be exported. So you can say, okay, I need the whole thing as a PDF, Word, Excel, or even sent automatically by email using your standard email client. These are functions that are integrated into the report designer and can be used by you accordingly.
Now we're already getting a bit into graphical analysis. Let's take a look at what evaluation options the inspection management already provides as standard.
For this, we switch to our evaluation module. And within the evaluation module, there are various analyses that we provide for you out of the box. First, I'd like to take a closer look at the topic of calibration. We have already performed the internal calibration for the measuring instrument, and during the internal calibration, measurement values are recorded. And now we often have the requirement where someone says, yes, I would like to see the progression of such a calibration characteristic over the course of different calibrations. And you can find that here in our section for calibration analyses, long-term analyses, with double click, I can specify which measuring instrument should be considered and which types of measuring instruments or calibration types I want to examine. I leave everything as it is. Click on Open. Now, for each individual calibration order, I get the measured value presented in a control chart format like this, and I can interpret it accordingly.
In addition to this specialized analysis, the system also offers the ability to create classic pivot analyses. That means the classic bar and pie charts, depending on which criteria you want to view. For example, we could look at the frequency of certain events. That means how often have I checked something in, checked it out, or perhaps moved or relocated the item.
For this, I'll select the standard analysis that examines the number of events. With the double clickers, you already know a filter dialog appears. Here you can now narrow it down. For example, what time period do I want to consider for the events stored in the database? Or maybe I only want to include the events of a specific type of test equipment in the analysis. For instance, I decide to do this only for mesh sliders now. By clicking OK, I now see the events stored in the database that are linked to the mesh slider. And Daniel? Good.
Yeah, not bad so far, but bar charts, this overview is pretty one-sided because I don't have any reference to time here. So I don't know how old the events are or whether they're even relevant to my analysis. That's why I can now enable pivot mode, giving me access to certain fields from the test equipment management. And for example, I can place the performed on field with the years range up here on the x-axis.
Now that's already more meaningful. Now I can see not only which events have occurred, but also how they're distributed across the years. This analysis that I have here can be filtered even further by saying, okay, among the events I have here, I don't want to include the event where something was added to a group. And I also don't want to document when something was removed from a test equipment group. So you can really control in a very granular way which events are displayed in this list. And do you like the bars at the top? Is that your style already?
Yeah, that's a bit better, but maybe we have another way to display it. I actually prefer pie charts. They give you a good sense of proportion, meaning the share of each value that's in the database. And now we can simply choose a pie chart, which gives me a complete overview of the frequency.
And with that, we've now created a completely new analysis, right? So here I've broken everything down by year. I've hidden certain events, plus changed the information up here regarding the graphical style so that I don't want bars anymore, but want everything in pie chart. And now I have to do this every time I want to see it, Daniel?
You could do that, yes, but it absolutely makes sense to do it once and save it as a favorite. At the top, I have the option to save this as my favorite analysis and I can access it again and again. Ideally, I even put the analysis directly on the dashboard. That way, I have a dynamic view of the frequency of events for my caliper, for example. And since, as I said, this is a dynamic analysis, next year I'll have a new chart that represents 2026 and its events, so to speak.
We have one more analysis that we brought along, which we also want to explain to you in more detail. And this analysis once again addresses the topic of integration into other Babtec modules. As we mentioned, these measuring instruments are linked with inspection characteristics in incoming goods inspection, production inspection, and outgoing goods inspection. It goes so far that the Babtec software knows exactly which measuring instrument number is linked to each individual measured value. Now, it can happen that during the calibration of a measuring instrument, you discover that the instrument has failed the calibration. Now, you don't know how long this measuring instrument has been out of order, so you need traceability to find out, yes, which measured values have I recorded in the last n weeks that are linked to this measuring instrument. And that's exactly the kind of analysis we provide to you as a standard feature. Open with a double click, select the measuring instrument, and enter the time period you want to analyze. I'll leave that blank for now. Simply click on Open, and the system will display all measured values stored in the database that are associated with this measuring instrument. The information I have now is only linked to a so-called inspection order, because this measured value was generated with a specific inspection order in the inspection module. Here as well, simply double-click on the information to jump directly into our order management module. Whether it's for incoming goods inspection or in-process inspection, no searching, nothing else required. It really works quickly in this area.
Now, if we've managed to excite our viewers and they want to switch to Babtec with their 3,000 or 4,000 measuring instruments and manage their equipment with Babtec Inspection Management, how do we get the measuring instruments into the system?
Type them in? No. Well, hire students. We actually see this quite often, that measuring equipment already exists in another system. There are Excel lists, there are Access databases, there are other software systems that already manage measuring equipment. Okay, at that point, we would ask you to bring these measuring instruments into a standardized Excel format. We're happy to provide you with a template for that. And this standardized Excel format is then an excellent basis for importing them into Babtec. It's not just a ready-made button we can press, but there's already a lot of experience to really address your requirements during this data transfer and to meet them.
That was Babtec Inspection Management, a comprehensive solution.
I hope we were able to give you a better understanding of the software. We'd be happy to show it to you individually. Just give us a call, get in touch via our website, or check out other videos on our homepage to get a complete impression. I'm glad you watched the video, and maybe we'll see each other again.
Feel free to leave a like and follow our channel so you don't miss any new videos. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.